Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm coming to you with my first book review on this channel, kind of. I had a really poor review of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, which I am going to take down and kind of start over. And I wanted to start with a fantasy book that actually means a lot to me. And that's because the Sword of Truth series by Terry Goodkind was the first fantasy series that I discovered all on my own. Kind of. I actually discovered it through the Legend of the Seeker TV series when I was about 13, and I was watching clips of it on YouTube, and I just fell in love, and I absolutely adored the show. And I anticipated the second season and watched the second season as it was airing, and I really just fell in love. And then when I realized they weren't going to make any more, I got very sad. And then I found out from somebody at my local library that it's actually based on a series of books. And so, of course, I had to jump into the books, and I read, I think, the first 7 or 8 books back then, however many were available to me at the time. By the way, I apologize if it's a little bit loud. I am recording this out in what used to be my dad's workshop, thus the Vietnam veteran flag behind me. And I live in Texas, and it's summertime, and it's hot, so I do have a fan running behind me. So yeah. But anyhow, I wanted to jump into the books as a result of my love for the TV series. And what I quickly found out is that the books tell a fundamentally different story with similar story beats. However, I don't necessarily think that it's a better story or a worse story than the TV series. I definitely think it's darker, but it's a different story all in all with similar shared plot beats. And I'm okay with that. Now, that said, I do want to address the elephant in the room that is Terry Goodkind, and I'll probably do this on all of my Terry Goodkind book reviews, because Terry Goodkind, there's a lot of controversy surrounding him, and I'm not going to act like it's not for good reason. Terry Goodkind, rest his soul, was not a very good person. I'm just going to say it like it is. He was very egotistical, which isn't really even the big deal. A lot of authors and artists are. But he was also insulting, and at times I would go as far as to say even cruel. He's known for having mocked Robert Jordan for not being able to attend a convention they were both supposed to be at. And at that same convention mentioned that, he was there because his doctor says his heart was as healthy as an ox, and that's what Robert Jordan was dealing with medical problems of. Beyond that, he belittled the entire genre of fantasy, insisting that he didn't write fantasy, he wrote human experiences, and his work transcended fantasy. So, all in all, giant douche canoe. But I do believe in separating the art from the artist in much the same way that I still adore Harry Potter, despite all of the controversy surrounding J.K. Rowling. I love the Sword of Truth series, despite all the negativity surrounding Terry Goodkind. And if you can separate the art from the artist, I think you can have a very good time with it. There are some claims of plagiarism about this, between this and the Wheel of Time. I have not finished the first Wheel of Time book yet, so I can't really speak to that. So I'll just be reviewing this based on my knowledge of the series, and I'll try to be as brutally honest as I can be, and not let nostalgia influence the review if I can get away with it. So, before we start diving into the review further, I know kind of a long introduction, I do want to give a trigger warning for the book. And I don't normally feel the need to do this because, sure, there's graphic content in a lot of fantasy series, but this book gets into some really more dark and depraved sides of the genre and of human nature. And that's kind of what I believe Terry Goodkind was going for. Terry Goodkind was, I forget the word he likes to use, but realistically we would call him pessimistic. And so he liked to focus on all aspects of humanity, including the very dark negative sides of humanity. So this book does contain aspects of sexual assault, child abuse, torture, gore, cannibalism, and possibly, worst of all, veganism. Alright, just kidding. But no, there is veganism. So it does delve into some of the darker sides of things in a way that even a series like A Song of Ice and Fire, I would say, isn't guilty of. So It is a darker fantasy series in that aspect. It's not all grim. It's not what I'd call grim dark, but it does touch upon those types of topics. So please keep that in mind. I mean, there's like torture until someone hits Stockholm Syndrome type of stuff in the book. So if that bothers you, it won't be the book for you. But let's go ahead and jump into the book. The first thing I want to say is the book is somewhat long. Let's see here. The exact page count is 573 pages, which you may say is not that long, but the font is very, very small, and so it feels like you're reading a much longer book than you are. So they do manage to cram quite a bit into this book. I want to start by addressing the writing prose in the book, and what I have to say about Goodkind's prose in Wizard's First Rule is his prose is okay. I wouldn't say it's amazing, I wouldn't say it's bad. It's just somewhere in the middle. Oftentimes I did feel like he was being overly descriptive in an attempt to pad his word count. Just being honest, it really did feel like that. And I know people lay a similar criticism against things like Tolkien, where he was overly descriptive of the world. But Tolkien was doing a great job of painting a beautiful image of everything happening. I think while Goodkind may have been trying to do that, I still believe he was just trying to pad the word count and make the book longer. All it really did was felt senseless and unneeded in this particular instance. I don't think we needed such lengthy, long-winded explanations about the surrounding foliage that this book provides, at least in the first, third of the book or so. The next thing are character developments and relationships. So the story follows a man named Richard Cypher, who lives in a province called the Westlands. The Westlands are a world, or a section of the world, without magic. The world is kind of sectioned off in three parts. You have the Westlands, the Midlands, and Dahara, which are all on the same continent. And at one point, there were barriers erected to divide the three places. So the Westlands was completely void of all magic, and they put a boundary up to give people a place with no magic to live. And then the Midlands was essentially your magical area, what you would consider your typical high fantasy setting in a lot of ways, minus a lot of the other races. Like, there's no elves or gnomes or dwarves or anything like that, it's just people. But you had your various forms of magic users and magical creatures in the Midlands. And then you had Dahara, which was sectioned off because they were the enemy. Dahara were the bad guys, and so the boundary was erected around them to keep them away from everybody and to keep people safe from them. So our character lives in the Westlands, which is a world without magic. And he's living there with his father and his brother and his good friend Zed, who's a kind old man who lives not too far from his house, and he's a woods guy. So he's very much a man's man, hiking through the woods, building bridges, chopping down trees, showing people where they need to go, hunting, all of that fare. And Richard's character, I actually think is fine. I don't think Richard is particularly deep to the level that I would put him in my top 10 fantasy protagonists of all time, nor do I think he's bland and boring. I actually think he gets a bit of a bad reputation from people who read these books and really don't like them, or who have been told to not like these books and to not read these books. And there's a lot more of those than the former, I'll tell you that right now. And he gets a reputation as either being a Gary Stew, can do nothing wrong, just super sugary gumdrop who never does anything bad. And then you have the polar opposite who say he is objectively a villain. And so when you have two opposing sides like that from people who don't like the book, that are so wildly on opposite ends of the spectrum, it's kind of confusing, because the truth is he sits more towards the middle. He's not really struggling with any particular complexity through most of the book. That happens in the second book. But he's not cookie cutter, yes sir, no sir, I'm so happy to be here either. So I think Richard as a character is fine. Really, where the book shines in terms of characters are Zed. Full name is Zedicus Zul Zorander. Just very witty, very fun. He's the wise old mentor type character. He's this series Dumbledore, this series Gandalf, this series, whatever wise old mentor figure you want to put into the series, the Yoda, the Obi-Wan, that kind of thing, guiding Richard and helping him along on his quest, while also secretly teaching him aspects of magic. We also have Kaylin, who is the Mother Confessor. Now, Confessors are a very interesting, very, very interesting people, in that they are an all-female group of unique magic users who have the ability to place somebody under what they call confession. And confession binds the individual to the confessor's will until they die, obeying any order without question, no matter how horrible, they will obey. And so a confessor's job is to help protect the people of the Midlands, and the Mother Confessor is above all of the confessors. And so the Mother Confessor is coming to the Westlands, not really a spoiler, this is all very early in the book, is coming to the Westlands in search of the one who would be named Seeker to, fight the battle against the big bad of the series, Dark and Raw, or at least of the book, Dark and Raw. The big bad of the series changes a couple times as you get into later books. And so that's kind of our party. That's our adventuring party. We have Richard, Kaylin, and Zed. And we do also have other characters who spend some time with us, such as Chase, the Boundary Warden, whose job is literally to guard the boundary and make sure people don't get too close to the boundary, because the boundary is magical and dangerous in nature and invisible to the naked eye. So if you walk into the boundary, you're dragged into the underworld, and he's making sure people are safe from all of that. The relationships between characters is a bit hit and miss for me. The relationship between Richard and Kaylin, when it's good, is great. And everyone, it does what everyone expects. You have a main male character and a main female character, and a writer who wants to talk about human experience, and so of course they end up romantically inclined towards each other with a bit of a will they, won't they kind of thing going on, like every single fantasy book series, or really any book series story, tends to do when you have a leading male and female character. When the writing between them is good, it's very good, and it can feel very happy, it can feel very emotional. But the speed at which they begin to become close and attracted with one another irks me a little bit. It doesn't come off as the most authentic. It feels very rushed at times, and I don't know, I have a hard time believing their relationship develops as quickly as it does. Maybe that's just because I'm used to the TV series, in which it takes Kaylin and Richard much longer before they begin warming up to each other and admitting they have feelings for each other. And that's actually one of the aspects I think the show did a better job. I know it sounds like I'm really, laying it into this book, but I'm just trying to be as honest as I can. These aren't major criticisms, but they're things I wanted to mention. So that's kind of your basic rundown. Now, the Seeker is, of course, the main character, Richard. A Seeker is an individual who has to be named and has to be true to wanting to help people and protect people, and they accept the burden of the Sword of Truth, which is the namesake of the series, which is a magical sword which is fueled by the emotions of its wielder. And I actually like the Sword of Truth because, unlike most magical swords, it has drawbacks. It's not all upside. It's not like Anduril, which is just magic elven sword that says I am king and has nothing to drag it down. Or the Sword of Godric Gryffindor, which is just this indestructible goblin-made sword that just gets stronger as it touches things that make it dangerous and deadly. Which, by the way, I think would be Geralt of Rivia's best friend. It would just absorb all of his oils and he would be good to go forever. The Sword of Truth has the downside that when you kill somebody with it, you feel all of the intense emotions that that person felt. And so the amount of remorse that comes over a person who kills somebody with the Sword of Truth is so much more significant than if they were to have used any other weapon, which kind of tempers the bloodlust of the wielder, because the sword does make the wielder angry. It feeds into their existing anger and amplifies it so that they will use the sword. But the drawback of the sword helps to counteract this bloodlust and temper the user to become more vigilant and careful in how they choose to inflict violence. And I like that. It's, some might think it's a needless addition, but I like having consequences to magical, powerful artifacts, and the Sword of Truth has those. So our party adventures outward, and they're on their way to battle the evil Dark and Rawl and save the people of the Midlands. And I don't want to get much more into the story beyond that, because we start getting heavy into spoiler territory. What I will say about the story is the pacing is fairly good in the second half of the book. The first third to first half of the book is a little shaky, I'm not going to lie. And I can imagine a lot of people dropping the book because of that. It's not what I'd call a grind or a slog to get through, but it's definitely not as quick-paced and, immediately rewarding to read as maybe some other fantasy series. For me, there was a stark contrast coming into this because I just got done reading the Dark Elf trilogy by R.A. Salvatore, and those books were breakneck action. The pacing was almost always amazing. And so I did notice the slower, kind of dragged out pacing of the first half of the book. And again, I know it sounds like I'm really roasting this book, but I'm not. I actually like this book a lot, and I'm giving it a fairly high score at the end because of the things that it does right. I think it really does right. I love the concepts at play with the different kinds of magic. The magic system in place, I'll go ahead and mention this. There are two primary forms of magic with sub-branches off of those magics. You have additive magic and subtractive magic. Now, additive magic works by taking elements that already exist within the world and the atmosphere and utilizing them to form something new. So, for example, it's not in this book that this happens, it's in a later book, but Zed, the wizard, is able to utilize the elements in the air by heating the air above a certain point to draw the oxygen from a source of water so that it would freeze itself, and that allowed him to deal with a foe. So even though he couldn't directly conjure ice, he was able to utilize the water and his fire and the air to turn that water into ice. And I think that's a really interesting concept. It's kind of a fun way to play around with magic. Instead of just having access to every elemental spell, he had fire, and he had to find a way to use that fire within the bounds of additive magic, because he can't take something away from it and make something new. Now, subtractive magic is the exact opposite. Subtractive magic is taking something from the world of the living and sending it to the underworld, removing it from the world of the living, sending it to the underworld, where it can then be turned into something else. And so they are complete opposites to one another. The wizard demonstrates this by when he's told that wizards should have beards, he grows a beard with additive magic, using it to add on to something that was already there and grow those hair follicles. But when it came time to remove the beard, he had to shave it because he can't simply erase what is there. That's outside of his ability as a wizard with additive magic. So those are your two forms, additive and subtractive. And then within those categories, you have subcategories. Like Confessor's Magic is a branch of additive magic that only Confessors have. And there's different types of magic users. You have wizards, sorceresses, Confessors, sorcerers, which you don't meet sorcerers and sorcerers till much later in the series. But you have all these different types of magic users that utilize additive or subtractive magic, sometimes both, in very different ways. And I actually think that's a really fun idea for a magic system. It kind of gets away from the typical, I have a wand so I can just do this type of thing that we see in series like Harry Potter, or when you get into like Dungeons and Dragons, where any wizard or any sorcerer can learn these different elemental spells and these different kinds of magic. So I really do enjoy that. There's also witch women, which I think are my favorite type of magic user in the entire series. Another highlight for me are the Mord Sith, which you don't get a ton of exposure to in this book, but you do meet arguably the best Mord Sith character in book continuity. And Mord Sith are kind of the polar opposite of Confessors. They are women who were taken as young girls and tortured until they became these hateful beings that turn an individual's magic on themselves. So they don't have magic themselves, but they can turn a magic user's magic on the user and use it to harm them, trap them, and subjugate them to their will. They have long ponytails, they wear red leather outfits, and carry a weapon, a baton-like weapon called an agile, which inflicts massive pain on an individual if wielded by someone who was tortured with that agile. So, for example, if I were to pick up a Mord Sith's agile, since I wasn't tortured by it, I would feel no pain whatsoever, and nor would anyone that I touched with it. But if I had been tortured by a Mord Sith and picked up their agile, that agile would inflict immense pain on me, as well as on the Mord Sith who wields that agile. So really, really interesting kind of character. They remind me a little bit of Witchers, but kind of the polar opposite from them as well. Just a lot of cool ideas and characters going on. Ultimately, though, Wizard's First Rule is just an introduction into a much grander series. And I think it does fine as an introduction. I see some people touting the book as the best book in the series, and I can't agree with that. I think it's a good story. I think it's a good start. But I personally only give it 4 out of 5 stars. And I know with all the negative things I was saying, you might be thinking, well, how is that possible? Because there's a ton of positives I can't talk about without spoiling things, without really getting deep into spoiler territory, and I don't want to do that. But let's just say that I do enjoy the interactions between people from different cultures, and a lot of the, any moment with Zed is a gold moment. Every moment with Zed is a gold moment. I enjoy the romance between Kaelin and Richard. I enjoy the fight sequences. I enjoy the magic system. I enjoy the plot. And I even enjoy how dark it is. Yes, there's horrible themes like child abuse and rape and mutilation and, you know, really dark, twisted forms of magic that involve gore. And I mean, pretty horrible gore. But they all serve a purpose. None of it comes off as senseless. Why is this character, you know, abusing children? It's to illustrate that particular character's sick, depraved mindset and highlight them as that kind of bad guy. And we all have heard stories of people just like this in real life. Some of us have even met people like that in real life who take joy in inflicting pain. And Goodkind wanted to represent that aspect of humanity in his books as well. The absolute worst kind of humanity, as well as the absolute best kind of humanity, so you can see the full scale of things, which I do actually appreciate. So overall, Wizard's First Rule, is it a good book? I think so. Is it a great book? No. Like I said, I give it 4 out of 5 stars. I could very easily see many of you reading this, giving this 3.5 stars, maybe even as low as 3 stars. But I would advise you to continue reading the series, because the next book in the series, Stone of Tears, is so good in so many ways. It has some moments that pisses me off, but it's such a good story. But I do love Wizard's First Rule. I would recommend reading it, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, taken something useful from it. Let me know if this format works with, you know, me being in this shed, little table, book on the table, me just talking at you. There's no high-end production going on here. Hopefully the fan is not too distracting. Maybe I'll put some music over the video, we'll see. But I enjoy getting a chance to sit here and talk about my favorite books, so I intend to do many more of these. And even if only one of you enjoys the video, that's more than enough reason for me to keep doing them. So, hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Peace, and take care.